again, and welcome back to what is now part 11, the 11th discussion of the Accreditation 360. And you can see that both Howard and Monica, thank you both for joining us today, are wearing sweaters. I wish I was wearing mine. It's cold. What that actually means is two things. One is it's getting really close to Christmas, and two, it's getting really close to Accreditation 360 being live, which I think is more, well, I don't know which one's more meaningful to people right now, but both of them were probably watershed events. So we welcome you back. We appreciate you being here. This is your first time and you want to catch up. Don't forget, you can go back to our website at mslhealthcare.com and register and see all of the first 10 discussions of Accreditation 360. And before I forget, because I always do, if you're one of our Accreditation Readiness Network members and you want to get your CECs for this video today, make sure you go over there and get those. So, first, I want to introduce Monica Stone, who's with us today. She's been with us a lot, and Howard Nussman as well, two of our clinical team partners. Glad to have you guys here today. Today, it's hard to believe that we're 6 months almost into this.
Right.
It's
Mhm.
gone by really quickly. Been a lot of fun. We've got a lot of good feedback from folks, and we invite you all. Please put questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them here live. If we can't, we'll definitely answer them post this video. So let's just get started. Today, we're going to talk about the accreditation participation requirements and record of care, right? So,
Right.
Howard, going to start with you. What's changed in the participation requirements?
Well, the good news there is not really anything except for the numbers. There's a change just in the numbering, just to reflect that these are the 2026 updated standards. So that's good news. But rather than just say that and move on, I think because it is the end of the year, it's a good time if you're the director of regulatory compliance. It's a good time to take stock of certain things, that need to happen at least once a year or whatever. And related to the accreditation participation requirements, um, if there's anything that I see organizations slip up on, is that our ever changing healthcare organizations, throughout the year, you've probably modified scopes of services in different areas. You've added some ambulatory sites. Maybe you've deleted some ambulatory sites. Your
Mhm.
organization is not the same today as it was January 1st of 2025. And I've gotten more than one call during survey saying, "What do I do?" The surveyors just pointed out some services that are not on the application. So it does happen. And I would just encourage you, as part of your wrapping up the end of the year, do a comparison between the footprint that you have and your scope of services right now versus what you have submitted on your application, because it matters a lot to the Joint Commission. And it is a requirement to participate in accreditation with the Joint Commission that you give them accurate information. Um, there's also, as I was looking through them, I came across one of the requirements that we I don't know that, Monica, I don't know if you can think of an example. I can't recall ever asking an organization to demonstrate this to me. But it is, again, it's a requirement for participation. And that is that you will not retaliate on an employee or a member of your medical staff if they were to submit a concern about quality or patient safety to the Joint Commission. And I'm not concerned that anyone would ever do that. Most of the executive teams that I'm familiar with in our client organizations, they would not do that. But the standard and the requirement is that you educate employees and the medical staff about that requirement, and that they have that right. And I can't think of, and Monica, you do more of the HR interviews while I'm doing credentialing, but I can't think of any examples of when I have seen evidence that the hospital provided that education. So it might be interesting to think, how have we done that? And how would we show a surveyor if they said, "Hey, Show me how you've educated your medical staff about this expectation.
I have seen it where, excuse me, it's just like one slide in orientation, to remind staff at the point
Hmm.
of hire or with the medical staff at their initial appointment, to have that information put in front of them saying, "Yep, you have the right and here's the information." So that's
Hmm.
really the only place I've ever seen it, but I believe that would suffice. It
Oh,
doesn't say it must
absolutely.
be repeated, it just has to be a one kind of a one and done. Mhm.
Yeah. And if it's something you set up 5 years ago, you might just make sure that slide didn't get omitted.
Yes.
And someone tried to, hey, let's see if we can make orientation shorter, spend more time on more other things,
Mhm.
um, and kind of related to that is that you have to communicate, to your patients and families that they have the right to to file a complaint and to contact either the Joint Commission or CMS. And it's I have seen it happen before that when the communications department was rebranding things that were posted in waiting rooms and whatever with the new color scheme and logo, and they might leave something off of like a patient rights poster, such as the correct phone number as to who to contact. So it's just a good time of year to make sure that those things that are spelled out in the APRs that they're all in place.
Yeah, I wanted to add when you mentioned the application, one of the things that happens frequently on my side of the fence, which is, the physical environment
Mm-hmm.
piece, there's a requirement to have the basic building information in for every one of those buildings or sites that are a part of the application. And so what drives that is the application process, not actually the life safety folks. And so that list kind of changes and evolves throughout the year and over the years. And oftentimes what happens is we forget to go on there and update that information, and that information is absolutely required to be updated. A lot of that happened when the Joint Commission got away from the statement of conditions being we won't go down that whole road, but when they got away from allowing us to have that kind of get out of jail free card from a life safety perspective, um, they we just don't visit the intranet site as frequently as we used to. And so
Hmm.
one of the things I would say, if you're one of those accreditation managers, or if you're a life safety facility person that's watching today, take time, a few minutes to go in, log on to your extranet or intranet, whatever it is, the Joint Commission's website, and see, are there sites that need to be updated? Does anything need to be changed? And heaven forbid there's any survey related PFIs that are still open. There shouldn't be, because they typically have to be closed. But so great. So anything else about the participation requirements that you guys want to talk about?
No. Oh, Monica?
Howard, we kind of batted this around before, and just a reminder that there's something that frequently gets cited that falls in the APR standard that we don't really doesn't seem really obvious, and that is falsification of documentation. So just a
Oh, yeah.
reminder that any time that there's a problem, like with code cart checks, being done actually done and the defibrillator check matching, this is the standard that it would fall under. So just remember that there are some elements within the APR standard that do affect clinical practice and practice out on the units.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. And the way I look for that is I'll at the code cart log or the dish machine, log. I'll look at the initials and I'll count how many days in a row I saw SS for Steve Sponbrook. And if Steve signed off 13 days in a row, then I always turn to the manager and say, so when did Steve take a day off?
Mhm.
And
I can
you would,
say they often pretty much never right now.
and it is amazing, how often you will see that someone has sat down because, oh, in this case, it's, there's a mock survey team coming through, but they will go through and fill the log out and
Mhm.
not change the initials, um,
It's
so,
I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you were at this particular survey, Howard. It was a long time ago, so I won't definitely hold it against you if you forget. But we were doing a survey of a large hospital, and uh, the crash cart logs were all up to date on every single crash cart. But they had a habit of leaving the test tapes on the defibrillators themselves.
Yeah.
So I
That's
started
another way to tell.
Right.
were missing not only days but weeks in some instances.
Mm-hmm.
So we started tearing those things off, and we took them into the boardroom and said, "Here's a problem."
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not as big a deal now because of the automatic testing from the
Right.
defibrillators, but
Mm.
still, that's and it's a tough situation to be in, but that's an absolute non-starter, right? It's because you question everything now.
Mm-hmm.
Everything
Mhm.
is questioned. So I'm
Absolutely.
glad you brought
Yeah.
that.
And not to, beat it to death, but to me it's a sign of the culture in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
If people are afraid to have missed, a weekend or some days on, a log that's supposed to be checked off, that they would fill it in, and, falsify a document,
Mm-hmm.
because they're afraid of the repercussions if they're found not to have done it, rather than to have a discussion about why we can't get this completed. What is the root cause behind the process failure?
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's
The process problem, right? It's because it's
yeah.
one person that's been identified as the person that does it, and they don't work 7 days a week. Or, I mean, there's almost always a process.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah. But thanks for bringing that up, Monica.
No
yeah,
problem. Mhm.
that's a good one because that we see that actually
Fairly
it's
often.
kind
Mhm.
of happening
Too,
again. I mean,
way
okay.
too often. But yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's the sign of the times, right? Everybody's struggling with from a staffing
Hmm.
perspective, and so it's part of it is. I hope that when we're out and about and we're talking about these things, we emphasize not the compliance piece, but the connection to the patient and why it really does matter that we test these crash carts
Mhm.
because if the time to find out if it's going to fail is during the test, not when we're actually working on a patient. But
That's right.
um, I'm going to get preachy here. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
So I'm going to switch gears really quickly and start talking about record care. Uh, so tell me a little bit about that module and what changes. Either one of you, if whoever wants to take the lead.
Yeah, I'll take a bite at this. Um, so the record of care chapter, it's one that we don't, you know, often think about, but if you in reality, it affects every other standard, well, nearly every other standard in the organization, because that is where these surveyors are validating through both open and closed record review what is going on in the organization. That's this patient story. That's where it's captured, and if it's not captured there, then it's really considered not done. So it really has a huge impact. In the changes that have been made in A360, if you go through the crosswalk, um, it's like 10 pages long, and there are a lot of shuffling of standards going on. There it's extensive to read through, which I read through every line, and I won't bore you with all that, but I'll summarize it. That there are 11 EPs that were actually deleted, and most of those were moved to just straight survey activity, where the surveyors added it to this survey process guide on to look for those elements. There were 2 EPs that were split. One EP split into 2 for clarity, and those 2, just so you can go look for them, are RC020103, EP5, and RC020401, EP3, have now split into 2 each. And there were 4 new EPs that were added, for clarity's sake, out of those, 11 deleted. Some of them, there are a few of them that they rewrote to just make them more clear. So the rest of all of those 10 pages of changes is, a shuffling of the standards and a consolidation into fewer EPs. But just like we've said on every other, event, recordings, presentation sample, is that, the COPs haven't changed. They're all still the same. It's just a reshuffling.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
you don't have to worry. Just keep doing what you're doing, but when it comes to finding where it's in the standards or where it's in the record of care module, that's what has changed. There are two, though, that have some pretty significant changes that I'll point out. One of them is RC 020101, and it's related to the clinical information requirements in the record. There is considerable wording changes in this standard. So just take a look at it and make sure you're familiar with the requirements of what has to be, clinical information has to be in the record. The
Or
second one is RC 020101 EP4, and
you
it's now solely focused on the informed consent and documentation. They
mm,
dropped out two other elements in that standard that had
mm,
to do with advanced directives being documented, and communication with patients, and documentation of patient-generated information. They're actually those 3 things were dropped from the EP altogether. But don't worry about the advanced directive one, because that kinda took me by surprise when I saw they dropped it from the documentation of the advanced directives. It's still required. It's just under patient rights, that it's required. So, um, those were the, 2 significant actual changes that I noted, in the, record of care standards.
Mhm.
the crosswalk has been a bit of a challenge.
It has.
We I know we were working on it with for our software perspective, and there's a lot of old standards they have not, at least as of this session, connected to the new standard, officially a new standard. And so we just have a note now where it says something like not yet determined, or I can't remember exactly what we
Mhm,
landed on, but
mhm.
yeah, there's still some challenges there.
Yeah. I would certainly second what Monica said. As far as they have deleted, if you just zip through the disposition document, they've deleted lots of standards, but all the requirements are still there. They just have
Mhm,
place them somewhere else,
mhm.
which is going to make it a little confusing for a while till people get used to that. Um, I would also just suggest, as you look at the record of care standards, you also should look side by side with the information management standards, because there are some things, in fact, both of them address unauthorized access.
Mhm.
Um, and in the IM standards, it goes a little bit farther and more specific about security and unauthorized access to the medical record, and confidential information, and also the accidental damage or destruction, which we can talk about some more later, maybe as far as pitfalls. But um, you know, fortunately, the lion's share of our clinical record is electronic now. And so, if people at least log out before they walk away from a computer on wheels in the hallway, and use screen protectors, that is fairly secure. But there still are shadow records and pieces of paper being kept in ancillary departments and in ambulatory sites that you need to make sure are secure and protected from accidental damage or destruction.
Yeah, I mean, the electronic patient record is a wonderful thing, but you talk about security, and I know none of us are cybersecurity experts by any stretch of the imagination, but that to me is perhaps the greatest risk right now to
Yeah.
hospital in general is
Mhm.
what happened. And we know of some hospitals that have had ransomware happen. And it's anyway, I don't want to start a fear mongering session about cybersecurity, because that's not the intent of this session. But it is something to be aware of.
Mhm.
What would you do if all of a sudden you lost access to your electronic patient record?
Well, and
Um,
and that brings up even though most records are electronic now, you still have to have processes in place for when you do go into downtime and you
That's right.
do flip over to excuse me, paper records, on how to maintain the safety and security and privacy of those. So not only in the like hospital outpatient departments or other procedural areas that may have some shadow records or
Hmm.
may have patient information on paper. You have to have processes in place for those, and that's typically where I find problems now is in those areas that
Hmm.
aren't part of the main hospital and not part of the electronic record,
Yeah.
except for during periods of downtime when you flip to papers. You've got to have that process in place and make sure it's working
Hmm.
um, for the safety and security.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think that's just good planning and emergency planning, you know, in general.
The other
Um,
thing in the record of care, just a couple of general things that I think it's a good time to remind you of, is remember that the, the Joint Commission can go back 48 to 60 months to look at records. So, that's the minimum for the federal, and states might even be longer. So know what your state rules are, but it actually calls that out in the COPs that they can go back that far. And then the survey process guide, it is recommending to surveyors to pull some random records from 48 to 60 months to make sure that they can be produced in a timely
Hmm.
manner in the original or legally correct format, so that, they're testing out, do you have the correct processes in place? So, and that goes for the if you still have things on paper too. So think about your paper storage and the retrieval process and all of those things that go with it.
yeah, I was thinking about paper storage and how I'm going to date myself here, but it used to be these huge medical records departments in the hospitals.
Mhm,
There were huge spaces, and it's kind of gone away.
mhm,
But
yeah.
maybe they'll come back. Uh,
Oh, I hope not.
yeah. Um, well, let's talk. So, are there any pitfalls that you're aware of, or they should watch out for, particularly with record of care? But I mean, if there's also with the participation requirements, we could jump on those too. But
There's actually quite a few, just because
Right.
it hits so many broad areas. Um, I think, one that bears mentioning is the authentication process. When orders are authenticated, and those rare cases when paper records are used and there are signatures on paper
Hmm.
and not typed out where you can read them, the legibility issue still crops up every now and then. In a recent survey, I ran across that and really and tested the organization's process of how do you identify a signature. What is your authentication steps if you're, to verify that
Hmm.
this order on paper or this report that's signed, is signed by, someone who's part of the medical staff and, is acceptable. So, even though most things are electronically stamped now, there are times when they're not. And so you need to just verify and make sure that those are still strong.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was surprised to see that in the Joint Commission's most recent list of most frequently scored clinical standards, and we can talk about that more later, but as to what's there. But what wasn't there was dating and timing, which has been, and it continues to be something most of the organizations we go into when we're looking at records that they struggle with if they still have pieces of paper.
Mhm.
Um, but in the health system that I go to here in Charlotte for my own uh, occasional need for care, they've totally gone with consent forms, and a lot of what many organizations we go into are still using paper for. It's all on an iPad, and you're signing with your finger, and it's time stamped to get rid of that need to have everybody, including the patient, date and time their signatures.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, it's interesting though that it's not one of the frequently scored standards, but if it's something we're seeing, it just makes you
Yeah.
just kind of hmm. Um,
Yeah, I think yeah. There's
for
some weighing, okay, so what's really important here? Which if they're doing that, that's that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Instead of
yeah.
beating people up about dating and timing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I got into a really long discussion about cables on sprinkler pipe recently,
You
and
you know, you can bring cables on sprinkler pipe into any conversation. That's
I can bring in that's my gift.
yeah,
Oh, anyway, that's one of 'em.
yeah. Let's go
But
back
it's
to more record of care pitfalls.
let's talk about that. But
So let me bring up one of mine. It just seems to be everywhere. Although you know, again, I'm not seeing Joint Commission score it so much. But if you really pay attention to histories and physicals, in particular prior to a surgical procedure or a procedure with anesthesia, I mean, I find issues with that almost everywhere I go. Either they're updating a history and physical that's more than 30 days old,
Mhm.
or they've got a prior H&P that's within the 30-day time limit, but it doesn't get updated. You know, the surgeon's in a hurry and he doesn't fill out the form they've created or the go to the space in Epic or wherever, you know, to say I've examined the patient and there are no changes. Um, and especially in outpatient surgical areas, you know, I will see a kind of a short form for a brief HMP, and you look at it and it's like, you know, the cardiovascular heart is normal, the lungs normal, you know, and you say, well, what does that mean? You know, if you look at the medical staff bylaws and their definition of what makes an acceptable history and physical, it's more objective data. You know, it's not that's not acceptable, but it
Mhm.
seems to just slip through and no one calls that out. Um, or if you really look at the time stamping of pieces of a history and physical, you
Mhm.
know, instead of just, well, what's at the bottom in terms of when that was authenticated. You know, you can see some things that are more than 30 days old. You can see some things that were done, you know, at midnight the night before. And, you know, as part of the physical exam, you say, okay, well, you know, the patient was not there, and with an electronic record, you can do a lot of copying, pasting, and anticipatory documentation.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
or the history and physicals done by the orthopedic surgeon, and it's all about the knee, you know, and there's nothing about the heart, there's nothing about the lungs. So, you know, I would encourage you to take a good look at, you know, across a sample of the medical staff who were involved in HMPs prior to a surgical procedure and make sure that what's there actually meets the requirements of the medical staff.
You know, Howard, some of those same issues you just pointed out with preemptive documentation and, um, well, primarily that, you can also see evidence of that in post-procedure notes and post-surgical notes as well.
Mhm.
So really pay attention to the timestamps on when notes are done because that will absolutely reveal if things were falsified is basically what it
It
is.
is.
And if we go back to the APR standard, which you don't want to do, you know, it really sets a bad tone for the rest of the survey. So use when those of you who are responsible for monitoring the record of care, certainly using the elements of the timestamp to help you figure out, was this done in the correct sequence? The
Mhm.
same thing happens with orders. I see this with orders as well. If care is provided before the orders were written,
Mhm.
time stamped in the electronic record. This happens quite a bit in pre-op settings, preoperative
Yeah.
care. And it's in situations where they haven't developed standing orders or protocols to follow. So if you're delivering the care before you have the order, then it's putting the nursing and respiratory and whomever else out of the scope of their license. And again, that goes back to a leadership standard, and you don't want to go down that path. So really, the record of care, again, you know, it has to reflect the correct, it has to be
Hmm.
accurate and reflect the care as it was delivered. And there are certainly, you know, surveyors get very astute at figuring out that story and, you know, and is it a true
Hmm.
story? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So we're
Can I mention something else about orders? Another pitfall. that it just popped into mind, and that has to do with the protocols and order sets, which falls under this record of care standard. And all orders, I mean, all care has to be delivered by an order. I mean, that's another standard. But the orders have to be, excuse me, protocols and standing orders have to have a process for their development and approval by medical staff, nursing staff, and pharmacy. And there has to be a process to update them based on the evidence that's in the industry. So when the evidence based practice changes across the industry, then you need to have a process to update your protocols and standing orders. And then you have to make sure that the two things happen if a protocol or a standing order is used. You have to make sure that that actual protocol or standing order ends up residing within the medical record. So it can't just be at a book on a shelf. It can't just be on a web page that staff references. It actually has to fall into the record so that when it is printed or looked at a later date by CMS or your attorneys or whoever else, that it's the actual content of that protocol is in the record. And the second thing that has to happen is that the provider who has approved the use of that protocol on that specific patient has to go in and authenticate that they approved it and sign off that it was done. So most of the time, the way we see that is there is an order to follow a protocol. Okay, and then the protocol then appears in the record. And then the physician or provider signs the order for the protocol, and then you got both of those pieces covered. So, Howard, you have anything to add to that? But that's pretty well what happens. And emergencies department has a lot of emergency care protocols that they, they use like for AMI or stroke or whatever. But there's others that it happens with, and we see problems with as well. Insulin, Pitocin infusions. Just think about the many different complex orders that we have.
Right. Right. And you're right. You do see some issues, like in the pre-surgical area, where they'll have certain protocols or standing orders, um, but they don't get placed in the record until after the patient's already arrived, and everybody knows. Well, Doctor Jones wants us to do this and this and this, so they do it, to be efficient. But you can't provide care that way.
Great. Anything else you guys want to? I know we're going to talk a little bit about the top 15, or did you want to?
Go
So
ahead,
yeah,
Howard.
maybe this is a good opportunity to transition from things that we see as pitfalls to, well, what did the Joint Commission actually score, and what's in their list of pitfalls. And there's only one standard in the record of care that has been scored in like the top 10 for the Joint Commission, and that is, let's see, it's RC in 2025. It's RC 020101 EP2, which is now RC 120101 EP2. And it has to do with missing or incomplete documentation. And so I think some of the things that Monica and I have been talking about would probably fall into that.
Right.
Um, uh, Although we'd maybe tie it to a different standard in provision of care or somewhere that says you have to do this, this, and this as you care for your patient and document it. But it's missing or incomplete documentation, and so they call out specifically protocols and order sets, as Monica was saying, that are not in the record. If we had an order to do it, but we can't see what specifically was in that protocol,
Hmm.
and staff documented that they followed the protocol.
Hmm.
Um, Another is, and we see this a lot, Monica, blanks in
Hmm.
the standard templates that staff are to use in order to complete an assessment or to complete you know any the documentation of any kind of a treatment or progress note or whatever. And it needs to be marked as it wasn't applicable for that patient or whatever, but you can't just leave them blank.
Hmm.
Um, and, so that, missing vital signs, missing progress notes, missing conclusions, whatever is called for on that form. Sometimes looking at a pre-anesthesia assessment, the ASA class will be left blank, and it's there to be filled in, and they just in a hurry and skip over it. So that falls into some of the Joint Commission's detail about what got scored. And then the other is just not following. It's not a Joint Commission or a CMS requirement. It's a hospital policy, um, and people are not following that. So it could be, some sort of pre and post treatment documentation of some sort of an assessment and follow up to be sure the patient didn't have an ill effect that doesn't get documented. We see a lot of times pain reassessment doesn't
Hmm.
happen after administration of a medication. So there were those three kind of buckets of, just uh, missing information in the record that they have scored that puts that RC now 120101 EP2 in the top 10 most frequently scored standards um, from the past 6 months or so of the Joint Commission surveys.
I think that just speaks to how the RC standard applies to all the other clinical standards. Because if it's in a
Mhm.
policy that you do something, such as your vital signs around blood transfusions, or your safety checks around restraints, or anything that
Suicide assessments.
absolutely
Yeah.
that has steps that you are supposed to follow and document. Surveyors are very astute at going to your policy and saying, "What do you say you're going to do? And
Yeah.
did you document it accordingly? Or were there
Mhm.
things omitted or missed or delayed or inconsistent?" So all of those things play into, I think, that standard
Mhm.
being cited so frequently.
Mhm.
Mhm,
Yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
So
It's a
So
lot. It's a lot.
it's a lot.
we were
Yeah.
running a little over, but it went really quickly. I just want to make sure there's nothing else you guys want to add before we wrap things up.
I think I might just add, so in the survey process guide, in the section called compliance assessment tools, I think, or compliance evaluation tools, there is the medical record evaluation tool. And I don't think it's any different than the closed record review tool that we've had for years, and surveyors have used for years. But you really should, I think organizations should have a good process for doing their own closed record reviews on a regular basis with people who know exactly, you got to follow the guidelines for good data collection, which is people who are collecting the data need to know how to collect it and what they're looking for, and everybody looks for the same things, which should be the things that a Joint Commission or a CMS surveyor would look for. But you really should have that. And the guidelines are that they would look at least 10% of the average daily census, I think it is,
Mhm,
um, during survey, or a minimum of 30 records. And, so if you're a large facility, you could be looking at 80 or more records, but have a really solid internal process for closed record review, and then holding people accountable, for closing those gaps that the Joint Commission sees, that the MSL consulting team sees in mock surveys, that sort of thing. And if you haven't been out to those offsites or into ancillary departments to look at how the paper records are being
mhm,
stored, and if you got a room full of a bunch of paper records and they got sprinkler heads, I mean,
mhm,
you're in violation of the standards unless they're in cabinets and shelving that's waterproof,
mhm.
right, Steve?
Yep. No cable on sprinkler.
And look to see if there are cables on the sprinkler pipes up above the
That's right.
ceiling.
That's right. Thank you.
You know,
Let's look.
There's another tool that might be helpful to people as well, and that's the CMS ATAG summary review sheet for the medical record module. So all these things are in the survey process guide. If you search through the 600 something pages, you can find them. And it really does give you a good ready-made checklist to use to look at what do you need to be doing for managing your record of care.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate your time and your expertise. And we'll kind of wrap this one up. We appreciate everybody joining us today. We wish you all happy holidays. It's the last one,
Absolutely.
2025. It's not the last one. We charted this out for 12 episodes. So this is 11. So we'll see you the first week in January. I hope everybody has a happy new year. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat right up until we close this down. We'll be happy to get to those and answer them. And if you want, you can go back and watch the videos, all previous 10 of them, which is quite a bit. So thank you very much for your time, both of you and Monica, and thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in 2026 when these
Yay.
standards are live.
Okay.
So
Merry
take care.
All
Christmas.
right. Merry Christmas. Yeah.
Bye bye.